The first one came from the east side of the property, through the mesquite break along the creek bed. The second one came from the north, where the Caliche Road dead ends into the fence line at the corner post. They were moving toward each other. Not together, not coordinating, as far as I could tell, but moving in a way that put them on a collision course with my goat pen and with each other at exactly 4 in the morning on a Thursday in November. I know the time because I had my phone in my hand. I know the directions because I've been watching that property from the same porch for 11 years, and I know where everything is in the dark. Quick thing before we get into it. A lot of what I've learned about Dogman doesn't fit into these videos, so I put it all in a book. It's called the Dogman Codex. If you ever want more, it's linked below. Either way, let's get into the story. What I didn't know, what I had no way of knowing when I sat down in that lawn chair with a cup of gas station coffee and my 30-30 across my knees, was what was going to come out of the brush behind them, what was following them, what was using them the way a man uses dogs to drive deer toward a stand. I'm going to tell you what I saw. All of it. I haven't told this to anyone except my brother-in-law Cody, and he thinks I lost my mind, which is his right. I don't need you to believe me. I just need to say it somewhere that isn't the inside of my own head, because it's been 14 months and I still don't sleep past 3:30, and I figure saying it out loud is the only thing left I haven't tried. My name is Del Benavides. I run a small goat operation outside of Cotulla, Texas in LaSalle County, about 60 miles north of Laredo, brush country. Mesquite and prickly pear and huizache as far as you can see in every direction, with the occasional live oak motte breaking it up along the creek drainages. The land is flat, mostly, with a few shallow draws where the water runs when it actually rains, which out here averages about 17 inches a year. But averages are funny things in South Texas. You might get 5 inches one year and 32 the next, and in either case, most of it falls in 2 or 3 events and the rest of the year is dust. I run about 40 goats on 85 acres, which sounds tight, but I lease additional grazing rights on the adjacent 200 from the Salinas family, who don't run anything on it anymore since old man Salinas died in 2019. Spanish goats mostly. A few boar crosses for meat production. My wife Lupe handles the books and the market contacts. I handle the land and the animals and everything that happens between sundown and sunrise, which is more than you'd think. The pen is a good one. I built it myself in 2017, cattle panels over a concrete pad, 6 feet high with a welded frame, livestock netting over the top to keep the owls off the kids. The whole structure is 40 feet by 60 feet, with a covered section on the north end where I put the water and the mineral blocks. I've had dogs get under the old fence. Before I poured the concrete footer. After the footer, nothing got in. Nothing. Before I tell you about November, I need to back up to September. Because it started in September, and if I don't give you September, November doesn't make sense. September 12th. I went out to the pen at first light to do my morning check and found 2 does on the ground. Both adults, both in good condition the night before, when I'd locked up. No trauma, no blood. No sign of a struggle in the concrete pad, which would have shown scratch marks or blood or disturbance if anything had gotten physical in there. The 2 does were lying on their sides about 8 feet apart, legs extended, heads back, eyes open and already clouded, which told me they'd been dead for several hours. They looked deflated. I know that's the word everybody uses, and I know it sounds strange, but that is the accurate word. Like someone had let the air out. The skin over the rib cage was sagging between the bones. The belly was flat and loose. Each animal weighed, I would guess, maybe 60% of what it should have. I checked them carefully. I've been raising goats for 11 years. I know what a coyote kill looks like, what a dog kill looks like, what a bobcat kill looks like. I've seen all 3. None of them look like this. A coyote opens the belly, a dog does the throat and shakes until the neck breaks, a bobcat goes for the head, the skull. All of them leave blood. All of them leave marks. All of them feed. These 2 had 2 puncture wounds each. Right side of the neck, just below the jaw, spaced about an inch apart. Holes roughly the diameter of a pencil. Circular, clean-edged. No tearing, no bruising of the surrounding tissue. The ground beneath each body was dry concrete, not a stain. I called my vet, Dr. Rosora Hinojosa, who runs a large animal practice out of Cotulla. She came out that afternoon in her white dually and she examined both animals, and she spent a long time, longer than I expected, looking at the puncture wounds with a headlamp and a magnifying lens she keeps in her kit. Then she opened one of the bodies, which I'll spare you the details of, and she confirmed what I already knew. No blood. The heart was empty. The major vessels were empty. She pressed on the liver and it crinkled. She said, "Del, I don't have a good explanation for this." I said, "I know." She said, "These punctures are targeted. Both of them hit the jugular on this animal. The precision is not consistent with any predator I know of." I asked her if she'd seen this before. She looked at me for a second and then she said, "There were some cases out of Webb County a while back, 8-9 years ago. I heard about them from a colleague." She collected samples and sent them to A&M, and then she shut down her practice and left. I never heard what the samples showed. I asked her to write up what she found. She said she'd document her findings, but she wouldn't be able to list a cause of death because she genuinely didn't know what it was. She said she'd put exsanguination, mechanism undetermined, on the form. She did. I have that form. It's in a folder in my desk drawer right now. The killings continued through September. One more doe, then a wether, then a young boar buck I'd been growing out for sale. 5 animals total in 3 weeks. Always the same. Always the punctures. Always the drainage. Always the concrete pad dry as chalk under the body. I started sitting up at night. Not every night. I have a ranch to run, and I can't go without sleep forever. But most nights, 3 or 4 hours in the middle of the night in a lawn chair on the porch with a rifle and a thermos. Nothing came the nights I watched. Whatever was doing this either sensed me or got lucky with the nights I missed. I set up a trail camera, Reckonix Hyperfire 2, the kind with true no-glow infrared, the kind that doesn't pulse a visible red light when it triggers. Mounted it on a T-post inside the pen, angled to cover the main gate and the north wall. If something came over or through, I'd get it. The camera ran for 3 weeks. I got pictures of my goats, 3 possums, a raccoon that somehow got over the cattle panels, and 1 coyote that came up to the outside of the fence and then turned and left without testing it. The coyote behaved the way coyotes behave, pacing the perimeter, looking for weakness, leaving when it couldn't find any. Normal predator behavior. I got no image of whatever was killing my animals. That's the part that kept me up more than the dead goats. The camera triggered on a raccoon, but not on what drained 5 animals through the walls of a 6-foot cattle panel enclosure with a concrete footer and netting on top. Either it was coming in a way the camera couldn't detect, or it was coming from inside the pen somehow, which is not possible, or it was defeating the camera, which also didn't feel possible but was starting to feel less impossible than the alternative. I called my neighbor to the south, Marta Salinas, Old Man Salinas' daughter who manages the lease now from San Antonio. I described what was happening. She was quiet for a moment and then she said, "Del, call Wicho Garza. He's at the place on Farm Road 1025, the one his grandfather built. He's been dealing with the same thing." I called Wicho. He answered on the second ring, and I told him who I was and why I was calling, and he said before I'd even finished, "How many have you lost?" 7 at that point. He'd lost 4. Same wounds, same drainage, same nothing on his cameras. His operation was Angora goats, about 60 head, and he'd reinforced his pen 3 times since August, each reinforcement more serious than the last, and it hadn't mattered. The animals kept dying. We met for coffee at the feed store in Cotulla on a Tuesday morning in early October. Wicho Garza is about 60, compact, deliberate in the way that men who have spent their whole lives making careful decisions about limited resources tend to be deliberate. He brought his phone. He had pictures of his dead animals that he'd taken methodically. Every carcass, every wound, organized by date in a photo album on his phone. The wounds in his pictures matched mine exactly. The punctures, the placement, the absence of any surrounding damage. We sat there at a table in the back of the feed store and compared pictures on our phones like we were comparing fishing reports. And the manager, a kid named Joey, who I've known since he was in elementary school, came by once and saw our faces and left without asking what we were looking at. Wicho said, "You know what my grandfather called this?" I said I could guess. He lost animals in the 70s. Same thing. He called it the Chupacabra, but he said that was just the word people used, the word that had a shape to it. He said whatever it actually was, nobody had the right word. I told Huicho about the trail camera getting nothing. He'd had the same experience. 3 cameras, different positions, different trigger sensitivities. Nothing. He'd tried a different brand, a Browning with a faster trigger. Still nothing. "It knows," he said, just like that. I asked him what he meant. "I mean, it knows the cameras are there." I moved one of mine twice. Each time I moved it, the kills shifted to the opposite side of the pen. Whatever area the camera was covering, that's the area the animals survived in. The dead ones were always on the uncovered side. I thought about that on the drive home. 40 miles of FM road and highway through brush country that looked the same in every direction, dry and flat and immense, and I thought about an animal that could read the coverage area of an infrared trail camera and position its kills outside the frame. That's not predator behavior. That's something else. I didn't have a word for what that was. October was quieter. I lost 2 more animals in the first week, then nothing for 3 weeks, then 1 more at the end of the month. By November, I'd lost 12 goats total since September, which on a 40-animal operation is 30% of my herd and represents more money than I want to calculate. I'd filed a report with the LaSalle County Sheriff's Office. A deputy came out, looked at a dead goat, wrote animal depredation on a form, and suggested I contact Texas Parks and Wildlife. Texas Parks and Wildlife sent an email with a pamphlet about coyote-proofing livestock enclosures. I have a concrete footer and a welded frame and livestock netting, and they sent me a pamphlet. Those 3 quiet weeks in the middle of October did something to me that I didn't expect. I'd been braced for more kills, more mornings of walking out to find another body on the concrete, and when they didn't come, I didn't relax. I got more wound up. The dread of the next one started doing things to my sleep that the actual killings hadn't managed. When the animals were dying, I at least had something to do. I had a body to deal with and a vet to call and notes to take. The waiting was worse. I started reading at night. Whatever I could find. The Puerto Rico wave in '95 was the place most threads started, and I followed them carefully. The accounts from Canovanas and Mocha and Orocovis, the vet reports, the press conference quotes from officials who could barely look at the camera when they said the word coyote, the descriptions from witnesses who'd seen the thing directly. A woman named Madeline Tolentino, who lived in Canovanas, had described it in an interview that got picked up and reprinted in 6 different places, and I read her account multiple times because her description of the body, the head, the ridge of spines, matched what I was putting together from the tracks and the silence and the smell. She'd seen it on a rooftop, standing upright, 5 feet tall, gray-green skin, eyes that took up 1/3 of the face, spines along the back from skull to hip. I read about Chile in 2000. A veterinarian named Tomas, no last name given in the account I found, who had performed 37 necropsies on drained animals and found puncture wounds he described as more precise than anything he could achieve surgically, who had seen it once, in a farmer's pasture at night, feeding on a goat with its eyes closed, who had sent tissue samples to a university laboratory and had the samples disappear, retracted, no record. The official determination, feral dogs. Lupe found me at the kitchen table at 2 in the morning on a Thursday in the 2nd week of October, the laptop open, a cup of coffee I'd stopped drinking an hour earlier sitting cold beside it. She stood in the doorway in her robe and looked at me, and she didn't say anything for a while. Then she said, "Del, you need to sleep." I told her I would in a little while. She came to the table and looked at the screen. At the forum post I was reading, black text on a white background, some account from a rancher in Maverick County that I'd found through a link on a livestock management board that had somehow led to a thread about livestock deaths with no explanation. She read for a moment. Then she said, "Is this what you think is happening to us?" I told her I didn't know what was happening to us. I told her the vet had no explanation, and the county had no explanation, and I was trying to find one. She sat down across from me. Lupe is not a dramatic woman. She grew up in Laredo, worked 10 years doing bookkeeping for a trucking company before we started this operation, keeps the accounts with the same precision she brings to everything. She looks at a situation the way an accountant looks at a ledger. She wants the columns to balance. When they don't, she finds the error. Whatever it is, she said, staying up until 2 in the morning reading the internet is not going to stop it from killing goats. She was right. I told her I knew that. Then come to bed. I closed the laptop and I went to bed. I lay there for 2 hours and I didn't sleep, and around 4 in the morning I got up and went out to check the pen, which was fine, all animals alive and quiet, and I stood there in the dark for 10 minutes listening to the brush and then went back inside. I did not close the laptop after that. I just waited until Lupe was asleep. There's a particular quality to reading about something that's already in your life, something you're inside of, and encountering accounts from people who were also inside of it. You read a Chilean farmer's description of walking into his pen at dawn and the animal's already stiff and pale, and you can smell your own pen. You read a Puerto Rican rancher's account of the sulfur smell and your own sinuses remember it. It creates a closeness with people you'll never meet that I don't have a word for. Like getting a letter from someone in a country you didn't know existed, written in a language you somehow already speak. The 3 quiet weeks ended on October 29th. One doe, third to last pen check of the month, found her at 5:40 in the morning. Same wounds, same empty body, same dry concrete. I photographed it. I called Dr. Hinojosa. I filed another report with the county that went nowhere. I got through the day. That night I told Lupe everything. The whole thing, all the reading, the accounts, the Chilean vet, and the Puerto Rico wave and Huicho's grandfather, and what I believed was killing our animals and why I believed it. She listened the way she always listens, without interrupting, tracking. When I finished, she was quiet for a while. Then she said, "Okay, just that." I asked her what she meant by, "okay." She said, "I mean, okay, I believe you. I don't fully understand it, and I don't know what we do about it, but I believe you. You've been raising goats for 11 years and you know what a predator does, and you're telling me this isn't that, so okay." I've thought about that conversation more than almost any other since all of this started. Lupe saying okay, the straightforwardness of it. She didn't tell me I was imagining things, and she didn't pretend it wasn't happening, and she didn't make me feel crazy for reading accounts from other ranchers at 2 in the morning. She just weighed it the way she weighs everything and decided the columns told her to believe me. That's the kind of person she is. I want you to know that about her, because the rest of what I'm going to tell you is partly about what this has cost her, and I want you to know who she was before. The night of November 14th was clear and cold. Cold for South Texas in November, meaning it was about 48 degrees, which is genuinely chilly when you're used to the heat. No wind. The sky was full of stars, the Milky Way running diagonally across from southwest to northeast the way it does in the fall down here. No light pollution within 30 miles. I could see the outlines of the mesquite clearly against the sky. The brush was in silhouette. I'd been on the porch since midnight. It was about 10 after 4 when I saw the first one. It came from the east, out of the mesquite break along the Chacawalla Creek drainage, about 300 yards from the pen. I saw it because of the way it moved against the starlit ground, a dark shape crossing open caliche at a low, fast gait. Too fast for a coyote at that pace, too smooth. It was covering ground the way water covers ground. No vertical bounce, no irregularity, just a shape flowing across the pale dirt. It was headed southwest, toward the pen. I watched it through the scope of the 30 to 30. I've had that rifle for 8 years. A Marlin 336 in, 30 to 30 Winchester, iron sights with a loopholed VX2 mounted. In starlight with a 4X scope, you can make out shapes and movement but not detail. What I could see was that it was on 4 legs, that it was moving fast and low, and that the body proportions were wrong for a coyote. The torso was too long, the legs too long for the body, the head too small relative to the overall length. Like someone had stretched a coyote lengthwise and taken the head off one and put a smaller one on. I started to raise the rifle, and then the second one appeared. It came from the north, walking along the fence line where the caliche road dead ends at my northeast corner post. Not running, walking. On 4 legs, same low body plan, same elongated proportions. Moving at maybe a third the speed of the eastern one, almost casual, following the fence line south toward the pen. 2 of them. That was the first thought. Just that. 2 of them. I'd never heard of 2 together. Everything I knew about this, and I'd been reading obsessively since September. Puerto Rico, Texas, Chile, everything. It always came alone. One kill at a time. One set of punctures. One empty carcass. I had never read an account with two. I tracked the eastern one in the scope, then swung to the northern one, then back. They were converging on the pin from 90 degrees apart, the eastern one coming fast across open ground, the northern one pacing the fence. Neither seemed aware of the other. They weren't coordinating visibly, no signals I could see, no pause and check behavior. They were just moving toward the same point. I had my hand on the rifle, but I wasn't raising it. I want to be honest about why. Part of it was the paralysis you get when a situation exceeds the framework you brought to it. I'd come out there expecting, maybe, to finally catch a coyote and understand once and for all that I'd been wrong about this whole thing, that it was big feral dogs or something that had an explanation. And what I was seeing was two things moving like nothing I'd seen in 11 years of being out on this land at night. So part of it was that my brain was behind what my eyes were showing it. The other part I'll get to. The eastern one reached the pen first. It slowed when it got within about 30 yards of the cattle panels, dropping from that fast, fluid run to a walk and then to a stop. It sat on its haunches and it looked at the pen. Just sat there, the way a dog will sit and look at something it's interested in but not ready to approach. The body was still. The head was forward, oriented toward the pen, and even from the porch at maybe 120 yards I could see that the head was moving slightly, a slow oscillation, left to right and back, like it was reading the air. The northern one came up along the fence to the corner, stopped, and turned to face the pen. Same posture, haunches down, head forward, that slow side-to-side oscillation. Both of them sitting outside my pen in the dark, reading it. My goats were silent. That was the thing I noticed then. The thing that made the hair stand up on my forearms even under my jacket. 40 goats in that pen and not one of them was making a sound. They're not quiet animals. They're never quiet when something is near the fence. Any time a coyote has come near the pen at night, I've heard them immediately. The alarm bleats, the shuffle of 40 bodies moving to the center of the pen, away from whatever's on the outside. Complete silence. I stood up slowly from the lawn chair, put my feet flat on the porch boards, rifle in both hands, and I watched the two shapes sitting outside my pen. That's when the smell came. Sulfur is the word everyone uses, and it's the right word, and it's also incomplete. Sulfur is what you smell when you strike a match. That quick, sharp bite. This was that, but it stayed. It didn't fade the way a match fades. It built. And underneath the sulfur there was something organic. Something I want to say was like copper or like the inside of an old car battery, metallic and sour. And underneath that, something I have no comparison for. A sweetness that was wrong in the same way certain flowers smell wrong. The kind of sweetness that tells your hindbrain it's not food, it's something else. Stay away from it. I pulled that smell in and my sinuses burned, and my eyes started watering. Not crying. The involuntary watering you get from cutting onions or from automotive chemicals. My nose ran. I wiped it on my sleeve and I kept watching the pen. The two shapes were still sitting there. Neither had moved. And then from the south, from the direction of the Salinas lease, I saw a third shape. This one was different. It was bigger, considerably bigger. The other two were the size of large dogs, maybe 70, 80 pounds if I was estimating right. This one was something else. It was moving upright, on two legs, and it was tall, 5 feet, maybe a little more, and it moved with a gait that had nothing in common with a person walking. The legs were jointed differently, the knee bending backward or forward at a sharper angle, the steps too smooth, the feet seeming to grip the ground rather than impact it. It was covering ground fast for something that size, moving on two legs, maybe 8 or 10 miles an hour, and it was making no sound that I could hear from the porch. The spines were visible against the sky, a row of them running from the back of the skull down the center of the back, each one maybe 3 or 4 inches tall, and they were moving, not waving, vibrating. A fast, tight tremor, like the string of an instrument that's been plucked and hasn't stopped resonating yet. The vibration was fast enough to blur them slightly at the tips. I felt it before I saw it clearly. That's the order it happened. The feeling came first. A pressure behind my eyes and in my sinuses, a tightening in my chest that wasn't pain but was in the same neighborhood as pain, and then the feeling became something lower, in my legs, in my feet, A vibration coming up through the porch boards and into my soles. Rhythmic, slow, one pulse every 3 or 4 seconds. My fillings ached. I have 2 crowns on my lower left molars, and both of them ached simultaneously. A deep, bone-conducted ache that had nothing to do with temperature or pressure in any normal sense. The 2 smaller ones on the ground didn't react to the large one's approach. They stayed in their spots, flanking the pen. The large one came up from the south and stopped at the fence line about 20 feet from the gate, and it stood there, upright, and it looked at the pen. I had the rifle up. I want to be clear about that. The rifle was up, my cheek was on the stock, my eye was at the scope, and the crosshairs were on the large one's torso. The shot was there. 100 yards in calm air with a 30-30 and a good scope. I've made that shot dozens of times on hogs. My body knows how to make that shot without thinking about it. I did not take it. And unlike Rudy Garza, whose story I read later and which is the reason I'm telling you this at all, I can tell you exactly why I didn't pull. It wasn't paralysis, and it wasn't fear, or it wasn't only those things. The rifle was up, and the crosshairs were on the center of mass, and my trigger finger was on the trigger. And what stopped me was this. The large one turned its head and looked at the porch. At me. And the eyes in the scope in the starlight were not the eyes of an animal that was unaware of me. It knew I was there. It had known I was there. It had walked up from the south, from the opposite direction from the pen, and it had walked directly toward the pen without any circling or scouting, because it already knew where the pen was and where the threat was and what the threat had in its hands. The head turned and the eyes found me. 2 large dark ovals that caught the starlight but didn't give it back. And the creature just looked at me for a moment with what I can only call assessment. Not fear. Not aggression. Assessment. The way a man looks at a problem he's already solved and is now just confirming the solution. Then it looked away. Back at the pen. The spines increased their vibration. Visibly faster, the blur at the tips more pronounced, and the pressure in my head went up a step, not dramatically, but enough that I had to swallow hard and my ears popped, and the ache in my back molars sharpened. My hands shook. The crosshairs moved off center and I tried to bring them back and they didn't want to come back. My hands were shaking the way hands shake when you're genuinely cold or genuinely frightened. The defined motor control going first. I put the rifle down. I did that consciously, deliberately. I leaned it against the porch railing because I knew if I fired and missed, or fired and hit but not killed, I would have 3 of these things no longer willing to ignore me. And something in the way the large one had looked at me, that flat, finished assessment, told me that being ignored was the best possible outcome I could get from the next hour. So, I watched. Before it moved to the gate, I had maybe 30 seconds where it just stood there, not vibrating the spines, not doing anything, and I used those 30 seconds the way I've never used 30 seconds before in my life. I memorized it. I looked at every part of it I could see in that scope, and I fixed it in my head because I knew nobody was going to believe me, and I knew the cameras had captured nothing for 2 months, and I knew the only record of what was standing, 20 feet from my goat pen, at 4:15 in the morning, was going to be what I could hold in my memory. The skin was gray, close to the gray of old concrete, with a slight greenish cast where the starlight hit it straight on. Not scaled, smooth, but not the smoothness of something wet. More like the smoothness of sanded leather or the inside of a car tire. There was a texture to it I could sense, even at that distance, a fineness, the kind of surface that would feel like nothing much under your fingers and yet would be distinctly wrong, distinctly not skin as you know it. The torso was narrow the way a greyhound is narrow, built for something other than bulk, with visible structure beneath the skin, the rib cage defined, the collarbone prominent, the joint of shoulder and arm angular and pronounced. The arms hung forward of the body rather than at the sides, and they were long, the wrists reaching below the hip line, the hands loose and slightly open. The neck was long and the head sat on it at a forward angle, the way a bird's head sits, not the upright posture of a person but canted slightly toward whatever it was looking at. The face, what I could see of it in starlight through a 4x scope at 100 yards, was mostly those eyes. The rest of the features were compressed into the lower half of a skull that was too large for the neck beneath it. There was a mouth. I could see the line of it, closed, and the jaw was narrower than the skull, which gave the face a tapered look from above. No visible nose in the conventional sense. 2 small openings at the center of the face, low, close together, that I thought were nostrils, but I can't swear to it. The spines. I want to try to describe the spines accurately, because I've read other accounts, and none of them quite get it. They weren't quills, not rigid like a porcupine's. They had some flexibility, some give, the way a fin on a fish has give. They were maybe 4 inches tall, evenly spaced, maybe 1.5 inches between each one, and they tapered from a thick base to a sharp point. The material was darker than the skin, almost black, and when they were vibrating, which they had been since the creature arrived, they caught the starlight differently than the skin did. A faint iridescence at the tips, like oil on water, changing with the angle. The large one moved to the gate. My gate latch is a simple barrel bolt, a steel rod that slides into a receiver. This thing touched the latch, and the bolt moved, slid back. The gate swung inward. I'm going to pause here because I need you to sit with that for a second. A barrel bolt is not complicated. A child can work one. But an animal cannot, because working one requires the ability to grip the rod and slide it laterally and apply directional force, which requires fingers. This thing had fingers and it used them on my gate latch at 4 in the morning. The gate swung open. The large one walked in. The 2 smaller ones followed, one from each side, and they went through the gate after the large one and fanned out inside the pen. The goats still hadn't made a sound. 40 goats in that pen and not one of them moved. I was gripping the porch railing with both hands. I could feel the cold steel under my palms, the slight roughness of the welded seam. I was focused on that, on the physical sensation of the railing, because I needed something concrete to anchor to. Inside the pen, the large one moved to the center of the herd. The goats parted around it. I want to be precise about this. The goats did not scatter, did not run, did not alarm. They moved, drifted, like water parting around an obstacle. The large creature walked through the middle of my herd, and the animals moved aside, and then closed back in behind it, and the 2 smaller ones positioned themselves on opposite sides of the herd and stayed there. The large one stopped beside a doe in the center of the group, an older animal, gray-muzzled, one of my best producers. It put one hand on her flank, gently, and she didn't move, didn't flinch. Her head was down, and her eyes were open, but she wasn't looking at anything. She was somewhere else, or something had put her somewhere else. The large one lowered its head to the doe's neck. I watched through the scope. I kept watching because I needed to see this. I needed to see it completely and clearly, so that for the rest of my life, however long that is, I could not talk myself out of it. I've spent 11 years making careful decisions about this land and these animals, and I was not going to look away from the thing that had been taking them. The puncture was fast. I didn't see the motion that made it, only the result. The head went down, and then the creature was still, pressed against the doe's neck, and the doe stood there, and after maybe 60 seconds her legs buckled, slowly, in sequence, and she went down on her knees, and then onto her side, and the large one went with her, staying at the neck, staying in contact. 2 minutes, maybe 2.5. The large one raised its head. The doe was on her side, and she was already deflating. I could see it, the rib cage losing its shape, the belly going flat, the skin settling toward the concrete like the structure beneath it was disappearing. The large one stood, looked at the 2 smaller ones, and they moved, each to a separate animal, each to a separate section of the herd, and they did what the large one had done, each in its own way, the smaller ones faster and less precise, more like a bite than a press. But the result was the same. 2 more goats down in under 3 minutes. I want you to understand that I was 40 feet from this. Standing on my own porch with a rifle I didn't use, watching something I can't name kill 3 of my animals in my own pen, which I built with my own hands to keep this exact thing out. The large one walked back to the gate. The 2 smaller ones followed. The large one turned at the gate and looked at the porch again. Looked at me. The spines were still now, not vibrating, and the pressure in my head had eased. Just looked at me with those flat, dark eyes for maybe 5 seconds. Then it was gone. All 3 of them, through the gate, into the dark, in different directions. In 30 seconds, there was nothing moving anywhere I could see. I don't know how long I stood at the railing, long enough for the sulfur smell to thin out, which took maybe 20 minutes, long enough for the stars to have moved perceptibly, long enough for one of my goats, finally, to bleat. One note, short, from inside the pen, and then the whole herd started moving and vocalizing, the normal noise of disturbed animals, and I let them make it because the sound was so ordinary and so right that I wanted to hear it. 3 does dead on the concrete, 15 goats dead since September. A barrel bolt on my gate latch that I hadn't been able to figure out who could work, and now I knew. I went inside and I sat at the kitchen table, and I poured a glass of water from the tap and I drank it, and I sat there with both hands flat on the table for a long time. Lupe was asleep. I didn't wake her up. I didn't know what I would have said. In the morning, I went back out. The 3 does were where I'd seen them fall. 3 puncture wounds each, right side of the neck. The same placement on all 3. Centered on the jugular. Clean entry. No surrounding damage. The concrete under each body was dry. The gate latch barrel bolt was in the open position, which it should not have been because I always lock it when I close up. I locked the gate. I called Dr. Hinojosa. She came out and she documented the findings the same way she documented the others. Exsanguination, mechanism undetermined. But this time she also said something she hadn't said before. She said, "Del, these 3 are different." The other ones, the punctures, were consistent across the cases, but these 3, the entry is more precise, more uniform. Like it got better, or like a different thing did these, something that had more practice. I told her what I'd seen. She listened without interrupting. She stood there in the pen next to a dead goat and she listened to the whole thing, and when I finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "I believe you." Just that. No follow-up, no qualifications, just, "I believe you." I asked her what to do. She said, "I don't know. I genuinely don't know." She documented everything. She told me she was going to reach out to a colleague at Texas A&M's College of Veterinary Medicine, someone in the wildlife pathology department, off the record. She said she wouldn't use my name, and she wouldn't make any official report. She said she'd let me know if she got anything useful. That was 14 months ago. She called twice, once in December and once in February. Both times, she said her contact at A&M was interested but cautious and wanted more evidence. The third time I called her, she told me her contact had decided he didn't want to pursue it further, and she didn't know why. She sounded tired when she said it. The way a person sounds when they've been told no enough times that they've started to believe no is the only answer. I have not lost a goat since November 14th. That is not a relief to me the way you might expect. Because the animals stopped dying in Chile in August of 2000, and the official explanation was dogs, and then they started dying again in 2022 in the same quebradas with the same wounds. Because a rancher outside Laredo named Rudy Garza lost 11 head between October and February of some year I found in a forum post, and then the kills stopped in the spring, and Don Lupe Cantu, who'd been there since before the county had a name, said it stops and comes back. It stops and comes back. I rebuilt the herd, bought replacement stock at the Uvalde sale, which is a long drive, but they had what I needed. Lupe found a buyer for the boar crosses who didn't ask too many questions about why I was selling down. I fixed the gate latch. I replaced the barrel bolt with a padlock, a master lock with a shackle, and I carry the key. I poured additional concrete along the base of the north wall where the ground had settled slightly. I don't know why I did those things. I know the padlock and the concrete won't stop something that can open a barrel bolt and walk through a herd of goats without alarming them. But I did them anyway because doing something is better than doing nothing, and this is my grandfather's land and I'm not leaving. The trail cameras still run, still catching possums and raccoons and coyotes that behave like coyotes. Still nothing else. I moved them twice after what happened in November to positions I thought would cover every approach angle. I adjusted the trigger sensitivity. I pointed them at the areas I knew the 3 creatures had come from and the areas they'd left through. Nothing on any of them. I know what that means. Huicho told me back in October that the kills shifted every time he moved a camera. I moved 4 cameras and the kills stopped and the cameras are still running and they're not catching anything because there's nothing to catch, or because what's there knows where the cameras are and chooses not to be seen by them. Neither of those explanations is a comfort. I still sit on the porch some nights, not every night. My wife has asked me to sleep, to take care of myself, and she's right. I can hear how tired I sound when I try to explain things, and I understand why Cody thinks I've lost it. But some nights I sit out there with the coffee and the 30 to 30 and I watch the mesquite break to the east and the fence line to the north. I want to tell you about the second time I saw the large one, because there was a second time, one time in the pen and one time afterward, and the second time is the one that stays with me. It was February, late February, dry and cold, the brush still brown from the winter, the ground hard. I was on the south section doing fence work at around 2 in the afternoon, broad daylight, sky blue and enormous the way it gets in South Texas in February when the humidity is gone and the air is thin and clear. I had a bag of clips and a fencing tool, and I was working a 200-yard stretch of net wire along the Salinas lease boundary. I heard it before I saw it. Not a sound, exactly. The pressure. The low pulse in the molars. The sinus tightening. Faint. Much fainter than at the pen, like something far away producing the effect at low power. I stopped working, and I stood still, and I looked at the brush around me. About 70 yards south, in a stand of heavy mesquite along a dry wash, something was watching me. I could see the eyes, 2 dark ovals, too large for anything native, set in the shadow beneath a mesquite canopy. They didn't move. Whatever the rest of the body was doing, the eyes were still, watching me work fence in broad daylight on my own property. I didn't move for what was probably 30 seconds. The pressure in my sinuses was steady, not building. The eyes didn't advance. I thought about the rifle, which was in the truck, 200 yards away. I thought about the machete in my fence bag, which is a tool and not a weapon. I thought about running, which I knew immediately was wrong, not because running was physically dangerous, but because running was what prey did, and I was not going to be prey in the middle of my own land at 2 in the afternoon. I turned back to the fence. I picked up the fencing tool and I put a clip on a stay wire and I moved to the next one. I kept my back to the mesquite and my hands on the fence and I worked. The pressure stayed at the same level. The eyes, when I glanced over my shoulder twice, were still there. After maybe 5 minutes, the pressure eased. I turned around. The mesquite stand was empty. The eyes were gone. The brush was still. I finished the fence line. I loaded my tools in the truck and drove back to the house, and I didn't tell Lupe, and I didn't call Huicho, and I didn't write it down. Not then. I'm writing it now, if you want to call this writing, because the fence moment is the one I think about most. At the pen in November, the large one looked at me and looked away. It had something to do. It did it. It left. In February, it watched me for 5 minutes while I worked, and then it left again. Both times it was aware of me. Both times it made a choice not to engage. I want to say that the choice felt deliberate, the way most things this creature does feel deliberate. Not instinct, not accident, but decision. I was assessed, and the assessment came back as something that did not require action. That is either the most reassuring thing I know about this creature, or the most terrifying. I haven't decided. Huicho Garza and I talk on the phone every couple of weeks. We haven't shared the story beyond the 2 of us and Marta Salinas, who had her own losses on the leased property in October, and who took them quietly the way the Salinas family has apparently been taking things quietly for a long time. Marta told me once, casually, almost an aside in a conversation about lease rates, that her grandfather used to say there were things in the brush that had been in the brush longer than the ranch roads, longer than the towns, longer than anyone could trace. He didn't call them anything. He just said they were there, and you learned to live on the land with them the way you learned to live with the heat and the drought. Not because you had a choice, but because the land was worth it anyway. I think about that a lot. Whether this is a version of the natural world that's always been here, and that we've been naming wrong and explaining wrong and filing under coyotes and feral dogs for 150 years, whether what I saw in November has been using this brush country and these creek drainages and this mesquite cover since before there were goats to kill here, whether the kill signature that shows up in Puerto Rico in '95 and Chile in 2000 and Webb County in whatever year and LaSalle County now is one thing or several things or a category of things, We don't have the framework to understand. I don't know. I'm a goat rancher in South Texas, not a biologist, not a zoologist, not whatever kind of scientist would be equipped to look at what I saw and put a name on it. What I know is what I've seen. What I know is the puncture wounds, and the drained bodies, and the dry concrete, and the gate latch, and the eyes in the mesquite, and the spines vibrating at a frequency that reaches into your skull and loosens your hands. What I know is that Wicho's grandfather in the 1970s was dealing with the same kills I'm dealing with now, and the official explanation has been dogs for 50 years. I'm going to tell you the last thing and then I'm done. 3 weeks ago, I drove to Laredo. I had business at the county extension office there, and afterward I stopped at a diner on Santa Ursula Avenue for lunch. Enchiladas, rice, beans, the kind of lunch you get in a Laredo diner on a weekday where the menu hasn't changed in 30 years and you don't need it to. I was eating and minding my business, and the man at the next table, who I had not looked at particularly, said something to his companion that made me put my fork down. He was a man maybe 70 years old, small and thin, wearing a rancher's cap from an equipment dealer in Zapata. He was saying to the woman across from him, who might have been his daughter, that someone he knew in Duval County had lost 12 goats in the last 2 months. Same as before, he said. Holes in the neck, dry ground. And the woman said, "Ay, Dios mío, again?" And the old man said, "Yes, again." And they went back to their food. I paid my check and I went to my truck, and I sat there in the parking lot of that diner on Santa Ursula Avenue, and I thought about a retired veterinarian in Calama, Chile, looking at the ridge where he'd seen it go upright over the rocks, every morning and every evening for 25 years. I thought about Nestor in Canovanas, sitting on his porch with a cup of Café Yocono listening for the coquis to stop. I thought about Don Lupe Cantu in a Webb County Ranchers meeting saying it stops and comes back, and nobody asking what it was because everyone in the room already knew. Duval County is 60 miles from my fence line. I drove home. I checked the pen, 47 goats, which is back up from 15, the herd I've been rebuilding, all of them alive. I locked the padlock on the gate, and I pocketed the key, and I went inside. I did not sleep well. I don't sleep well anymore, if I'm being straight with you. I get 4, 5 hours, sometimes 6 if I'm lucky. I wake up around 3:30 or 4 and I lie there and I listen, and when I've been lying there long enough, I get up and I go to the kitchen window and I look out at the pen. The floodlight I put up in December throws a circle of light over the whole structure, leaves nothing dark inside the fence. I watch for maybe 10 minutes. The goats are sleeping or standing in that half-awake way goats stand, nothing moving in the mesquite outside the light's edge, the padlock on the gate doing whatever a padlock can do against something with fingers. Then I make coffee and I sit at the table, and I wait for the sun. The land is worth it. That's what Marta Salinas' grandfather said. You learn to live on the land with the things that are already here, not because you have a choice, but because the land is worth it anyway. My grandfather bought this 85 acres in 1961. My father ran sheep on it until the wool prices collapsed and switched to goats. I took it over in 2013. My son is 14 and wants to study engineering and probably won't come back to this land. And that's okay. That's his choice. But it'll still be here when he changes his mind. The fence I built. The concrete pad I poured. The herd I've rebuilt twice now. The padlock on the gate. And somewhere in the brush to the south, in the heavy mesquite along the dry wash where the Salinas lease meets the back end of nothing, something with dark eyes and spines and fingers is doing what it does between visits, waiting for whatever it waits for. Patient in the way that things are patient when they've been on a piece of land longer than anyone living can remember, and fully expect to be there longer than anyone currently alive will be. I'll be on the porch if you need me, with the coffee and the rifle. And the padlock key in my pocket. Always the padlock key in my pocket. The thing Wicho found on his trail camera in January was this: nothing. Meaning the camera itself had been removed from the T-post where he'd mounted it and placed on the ground about 15 feet away. Lens down, face in the dirt, not knocked down by wind, moved. Set down, carefully, with the lens against the ground, so it couldn't see anything. The camera had been running, The SD card had 5 days of images, and the last image before the camera was moved was a timestamp reading 1:47 a.m., and the frame was clear, his north fence, mesquite beyond, nothing unusual, and then the next image was taken at 1:47 a.m. and 3 seconds, and the image was a close-up of the caliche dirt 2 inches from the lens. Whatever moved the camera moved it in under 3 seconds, not knocked it down, moved it deliberately, oriented it lens down, set it there, then left. There were no subsequent images of anything because the lens was in the dirt. Huicho called me when he found it. He described it to me on the phone, and I could hear in his voice the same quality I'd heard in Junior Trevino's voice in the Rudy Garza account, that thin, compressed quality of a man describing something he'd rather not be describing. When he finished, I said, "How'd you know the camera had been running? Why didn't whatever moved it just turn it off?" Huicho said, "Because it doesn't know how cameras work. It knows what a camera does, that it watches, but it figured that out from the camera's behavior, the lens pointing at the fence, moving the lens so it can't point at the fence anymore. It doesn't know there's a switch. It found the solution without understanding the mechanism." I sat with that for a while. An intelligence that can figure out what a camera does and solve for it without being able to figure out how the camera works. That's a particular kind of cognition. Not dumb, not fully opaque to human technology either. Somewhere in between, solving problems in ways that map onto the problem's surface characteristics without going deeper. That's not an animal, is the thing. That's not what an animal does. An animal afraid of a camera either avoids it or ignores it. An animal doesn't pick the camera up and put it face down in the dirt. Before I drove to Huicho's, I made a stop I hadn't planned on. There's a man named Eligio Sainz who runs what's left of his family's cattle operation out on a county road southeast of Cotula, about 18 miles from my place. Eligio is 74, maybe 75 now, and he's one of those men who seems to have been old his entire life. He was old when I was a kid, and he's old now, and the ranch looks the same as it looked 40 years ago. The same corrugated metal barn, the same hand-built concrete water tank that his father poured in the 50s. He runs about 30 head of Longhorn Cross cattle, and he doesn't need to run anything because his kids send money from Houston and San Antonio, but he runs them anyway because stopping would mean something he's not willing to mean. I'd heard Eligio's name come up twice since September, both times indirectly. Once from Marta Salinas, who'd mentioned him in passing as someone who'd had troubles with his cattle years back, troubles she didn't specify. Once from Huicho, who'd said Eligio's grandfather and his own grandfather had known each other, had talked about the same things, back in the 70s. I pulled into his place on a cold January morning, and Eligio came to the door before I'd knocked, which told me he'd been watching the road. I introduced myself. He said he knew who I was. He said, "Come in." His kitchen smelled like coffee and old wood and the particular smell of a house that's been heated by the same gas stove for 50 years. He poured 2 cups without asking and put them on the table and sat down across from me. I told him I was losing livestock. I told him what I'd found, the wounds, the blood, the cameras that picked up nothing. I didn't tell him about November yet. I wanted to hear him first. He listened without expression. When I finished, he drank some coffee and he said, "How many?" 12, I told him. He nodded. Like 12 was a number that made sense to him in a context he'd been carrying for a long time. "My father lost 9 in one summer," he said. This would have been 1968-69. I was a teenager. He didn't talk about it much while it was happening, only after. He said he'd reported it to the county, and the county said dog pack. He knew it wasn't dogs. He paused. He'd seen something on the east pasture one night. He was checking fence after dark. He did that sometimes. He had insomnia his whole life, and he saw something moving along the fence line that he said was wrong. Wrong the way things are wrong when you know what's right and what you're looking at, isn't it? I asked him what his father described. Eligio looked at his coffee cup. He said it was tall, upright, moving fast. He said the way it moved, he kept thinking bird, even though it wasn't a bird, and it wasn't the size of a bird. Something about the way the joints worked. And there was a smell, he said, like something chemical, like a struck match that wouldn't fade. Sulfur. His father, in 1968 on this county road in LaSalle County, smelling the same thing I'd smelled from my porch in November. "He didn't go any closer," Eligio said. He was a practical man, and he understood when a situation was asking him to leave. He left. In the morning, he found 2 more cattle dead. I asked if it stopped. Eventually, things like that stop. Then they come back. He looked up at me. "You're not the first person to sit in this kitchen with that look on your face. Your neighbor Garza's father sat here in '81, same look. Man from the Benavides ranch came in '93. Huicho Garza himself came about 8-9 years back. All of them losing animals. All of them getting the same answer from the county." He set down the cup. "You know what the answer is." I told him I knew. "Then you know what to do. Document what you can. Protect what you can. And understand that you are on a piece of land that has had this thing on it since before your grandfather was born, and it will have it after your grandchildren are gone. That's not a comfortable thing, but it's the honest thing." I sat in Eligio Sainz's kitchen for another 20 minutes. He didn't tell me anything else specific, no further sightings, no additional encounters. What he gave me was something different. He gave me scale. My 11 months of this, my 12 dead goats, and my 3 nights of sitting on the porch with a rifle dropped into 50+ years of the same thing on the same roads, reported in the same kitchens, filed with the same county office, and explained away with the same word. Dogs, always dogs, for at least 50 years in LaSalle County, Texas, and probably longer than that. I drove over to Huicho's place, and he showed me the camera and the spot where it had been moved. The T-post it had been mounted on was intact. The mount hardware was intact. The camera had simply been lifted off the mount, carried 15 feet, and set down. The ground around where the camera had been set down had 2 marks in the caliche, paired, about 8 inches apart, roughly circular, the diameter of something like a large fist pressed firmly into the soft surface. 2 points of contact, side by side, where something had knelt or crouched to set the camera down carefully. I looked at those marks in the caliche, and I thought about the hand on my gate latch, 3 fingers and 1 shorter opposing digit. The marks in the caliche were consistent with that hand, pressed flat, palm down, carefully placing something fragile enough to set down rather than drop. We stood there, in the January cold, looking at 2 marks in the dirt, and neither of us said anything for a while. The livestock deaths at Huicho's had also stopped. End of November, same rough timeline as mine. We compared notes, and the last kills at each of our properties were within a week of each other, which suggested a single pattern, not separate independent events. Whatever had been working this area had stopped working it on roughly the same schedule. The question was where it went. Brush country in South Texas runs for hundreds of miles. Webb, Duval, LaSalle, Zavala, Dimmitt, Maverick counties, all of it the same. Mesquite and Prickly Pear and Caliche under the same enormous sky, threaded with FM roads and county roads and the occasional 2-lane state highway. You could spend a month in that country without seeing the same place twice. Something that doesn't want to be found, that moves through brush at the kind of speed I'd seen, covering ground the way it covered ground, could be anywhere in that country at any time, and you would never find it by looking. The second thing I need to tell you about is the university researcher. Her name was Dr. Graciela Montoya, and she was affiliated with the biology department at Texas A&M International University in Laredo. She called me in March on a Tuesday afternoon, my cell number, and she said she'd gotten my name from Dr. Hinojosa, and she was researching reports of unusual livestock predation in LaSalle and Webb counties, and she wanted to talk to me. I asked her how she'd gotten my number. She said, Dr. Hinojosa had given it to her. With my permission, she'd checked with Dr. Hinojosa before reaching out. I called Dr. Hinojosa that evening, and Rosora said yes. She'd given my name and number to a researcher at A&M International who had contacted her through the department there, someone who seemed legitimate and was asking the right questions and not the wrong ones. I called Dr. Montoya back, and we talked for about 45 minutes. She asked careful, specific questions. She asked about the wound geometry. She asked about the temperature of the bodies at time of discovery. She asked whether I'd noticed any pattern in which animals were targeted, age, sex, position in the herd hierarchy. She asked about the sulfur smell, and she asked about the pressure sensation, and she asked about the trail cameras. And when I described the camera being moved at Wicho's, she went very quiet for a moment and then asked me to repeat that part. She asked if she could come out and see the pen and the surrounding area. I said yes. She said she'd be in touch about scheduling. That was the last time I spoke with her. I called her office at A&M International 3 times between March and May. The first time, her voicemail. The second time, voicemail again. The third time, a department coordinator told me Dr. Montoya was on sabbatical and they didn't have contact information. I asked if she was expected back. The coordinator said she didn't know. I searched Dr. Graciela Montoya on the university's faculty directory. She was listed with a research focus in wildlife ecology and ungulate behavior in semi-arid environments. Her last published paper, which I found through the university library website, was from 2021. Nothing after that. Dr. Hinojosa, when I told her, sighed. Just a long, quiet exhale on the phone. She said, "I'm sorry, Del. I thought she was going to be helpful." I said, "Did you tell her anything specific? The findings from the necropsies?" She said yes. She'd shared the necropsy reports, the tissue temperature anomalies, the wound geometry. Everything she'd documented. I said, and then she called me, and then she disappeared. Rosora said, "Yes." We didn't say anything for a moment. She said, "I want you to know that my records are complete. Everything I documented is in my files. If anything happens to those files, I have copies off-site." I asked why she was telling me that. She said, "Because a veterinarian I heard about years ago in Webb County collected samples and closed her practice and left. And now a researcher called you, asked the right questions, asked to come see the property, and then stopped returning calls? Those are 2 data points. I'm not comfortable with 2 data points." I told her I wasn't either. The third thing, the thing I haven't told anyone, happened in late December, about 6 weeks after November 14th. I was walking the south fence line, as I do every 2 weeks, checking for any breaks or loose stays. It was afternoon, warm for December, maybe 65 degrees, the brush green-brown and dry. I was working my way along the Salinas lease boundary toward the dry wash where I'd seen the eyes in the mesquite in February. At the time, the February sighting hadn't happened yet. This was December, so all I knew about that wash was that it was where the caliche gets soft along the drainage and the mesquite is thicker. About 300 yards south of my south fence line, off my property and onto the lease, I found something in the caliche, a depression, roughly circular, about 4 feet in diameter, pressed into the soft ground of the wash. The edges of the depression were smooth, not sharp, the way ground would be if something heavy had rested in it for a long time. The center of the depression was darker than the surrounding soil, a faint reddish-brown discoloration, and when I crouched down and pressed my palm to the center of it, the ground was warm. Not sun-warm. The surrounding caliche was sun-warm, which meant maybe 75 degrees in that afternoon light. The center of the depression registered as distinctly warmer, maybe 15-20 degrees above the surrounding ground. In December, in shade, that's not solar heating. No tracks in or out. The soft caliche around the depression showed no footprints, no drag marks, nothing. Just the depression and the warm center and the discolored soil. I looked at it for a long time. I took pictures on my phone. I got down on my hands and knees and I looked at the soil in the center carefully, and I found 2 things that I've thought about every day since. First, the soil in the center had a crystalline quality, a slight sparkle under the afternoon light, as if it had been heated above its normal range, and some of its mineral content had been altered. Caliche is calcium carbonate, essentially limestone, and when calcium carbonate is heated significantly, above about 800 degrees Celsius, it calcines into calcium oxide. I'm a goat rancher, not a geologist, but I've worked around lime and concrete my whole life, and I know what ordinary caliche looks and feels like. The soil in the center of that depression had been changed. Not dramatically, but changed. Second, at the very center of the depression, pressed into the soil at a depth of maybe a 1/4 inch, were 2 marks, paired, about 8 inches apart, roughly circular. The same marks I'd later see at Wicho's place when he showed me where the camera had been set down. Something had rested there for long enough to warm the ground significantly and to alter the soil chemistry. something that generated substantial heat from its body or from a location near the base of its torso, and it had knelt or crouched at some point, pressing those hands into the soft caliche, leaving the same paired marks I would recognize months later in Huicho's yard. I took the pictures and I covered the depression with a piece of flat caliche rock I found nearby, which I understand in retrospect was probably pointless but felt necessary. I walked back to the fence and back to the house, and I made dinner and I watched the evening news with Lupe, and I didn't say anything about what I'd found. I still have the pictures. They're on my phone, and I have a copy on a thumb drive in the gun safe, along with the form Dr. Hinojosa filled out and a printed copy of everything I've said here. If something happens to me, Lupe knows the gun safe combination, and she knows the folder is there, and I've asked her to give it to someone who'll know what to do with it, though I'm not sure who that someone is. The heat signature in that depression, the altered soil, the paired handprints, those details, put together with what I know about the spines and the pressure waves they produce, are the closest I can come to a theory about how this thing operates. The spines produce a low-frequency field that affects the nervous system of nearby animals and humans. That field requires energy. Whatever produces, it generates heat as a byproduct. The heat is significant enough to warm the ground, and over time, alter the chemistry of caliche soil. That's the most I can construct from what I have. I'm not a scientist and I know my limits, but I know how to look at evidence, and I know how to build from what I can confirm toward what I can't. Here is what I can confirm. 12 animals killed since September of last year on my property, 4 on Huicho's, at least 3 on the Salinas lease, all with the same wound pattern, all exsanguinated completely through puncture wounds a veterinarian described as more precise than surgical instruments. No blood at the scene of any kill. 3 creatures on my property in November, 2 smaller quadrupeds, and 1 larger bipedal animal that used articulated fingers to open a barrel bolt, that moved a herd of 40 goats without alarming them, that made deliberate eye contact with me and assessed me and chose not to engage. A university researcher who asked the right questions and then stopped returning calls. A warm depression in the caliche 300 yards south of my fence with altered soil and handprints. And a dry wash in the mesquite where something with dark eyes watched me work fence for 5 minutes in broad daylight and then left without a sound. I'll tell you what I've done with all of this. I've kept the records. I've kept the photos and the necropsy forms and the trail camera images that show nothing, which are their own kind of record. I've maintained relationships with Huicho and with Dr. Hinojosa and with Marta Salinas, the 3 people who know what's been happening out here and who have reasons of their own not to talk about it publicly. I check in with Huicho every 2 weeks. I let Rosora know if anything changes at the pen. I've told Marta she can call me anytime she gets a report from the lease property, and I've read 7 years of accounts. That researcher I mentioned told me, and she doesn't know the half of it, because the accounts go back further than 7 years. Go back 50 years in Webb County, with Don Lupe Cantu and his memory of 1,997. Go back to the 1970s with Huicho's grandfather. Go back to 3 generations of a Chilean family in the Atacama. Go back to 1,995 in Canovanas with Nestor and his goats and his German shepherd named Chico who never recovered. The kill signature doesn't change. It's the same in Puerto Rico and in Chile and in Texas. The punctures, the placement, the drainage, the absence of blood at the scene. If these are different animals in different regions, they share a method down to the details. Same entry angle, same target vessels, same result. Evolution doesn't produce that kind of consistency across 5,000 miles of geographic separation in less than 50 years. Something else does. I have a theory that I'll offer with the caveat that I'm a goat rancher, and this is speculation. I think what we're calling the Chupacabra in Puerto Rico, and the Chupacabra in Texas, and the creature in Chile's Atacama, and whatever it was that 3 generations of a farming family dealt with in the same quebradas are related. Maybe variants of one thing. Maybe stages of one thing. The smaller quadrupeds I saw in November, are those a younger form? A different sex? A different variant adapted to different terrain? I don't know. What I know is that the large bipedal one controlled them, or at least preceded them, and that they deferred to it in the pen. 2 smaller things flanking the herd, positioned to prevent flight. 1 large thing selecting and feeding. That's not pack hunting as we understand it in canids or in any predator model I know of. That's something more organized, more deliberate. The researcher asked me, in that 45-minute conversation I had with her before she disappeared, whether the smaller ones had also fed. I told her yes, each had taken a goat. She asked me whether they fed at the same time as the large one or sequentially. I told her the large one fed first, then the 2 smaller ones fed simultaneously after the large one had finished. She asked me how long the total event lasted from gate opening to gate closing. I told her about 12 to 15 minutes. She said, "That's a very efficient extraction for 3 animals." Extraction. She used the word extraction. I asked her what she meant by that. She said, a system optimized for extraction would have a different efficiency profile than a system optimized for predation. A predator kills to eat, an extractor kills to collect. The kill is incidental. The collection is the point. I've thought about that word for 8 months. Extraction. Something that doesn't feed on the animal it kills. Something that takes only the blood and leaves the body behind intact. A perfect container that was used and set aside. Not wasted. The body is left in good condition because it was never the objective. The blood was the objective, and the body was the vehicle. If that framing is right, and I don't know that it is, then what I have on my property every September through November is not a predator event, it's a harvest. And what I am, in that framing, is not a rancher being preyed upon. I'm a farmer whose crop is being harvested by something that was here before I was, that will be here after I'm gone, that does what it does on a schedule I don't control and can't predict, on land that I own by the legal definitions of LaSalle County, Texas. But that something else has been using for purposes I don't fully understand for longer than this county has existed. I don't know what to do with that. I've been sitting with it for 14 months, and I don't know what to do with it. The land is worth it. I keep coming back to that. Marta's grandfather said it, and I think it's true. What else are you going to do? This is my grandfather's land and my father's land, and someday it'll be my son's land, even if he has to come back from wherever engineering takes him to collect it. The mesquite and the prickly pear, and the caliche, and the enormous sky, and the Milky Way, and the FM roads, and the diner on Santa Ursula Avenue, and the weight of 4 generations of people who worked this ground and made a life on it. Something else also uses this ground. Has for a long time, will for longer. I want to tell you what this has done to Lupe, because I think it's the part I've been least honest about, even with myself. She said okay in October and she meant it, and she has not wavered from it. She believes me. That's not the problem. The problem is what believing me requires her to live inside of every day. She is a woman who grew up in Laredo, who lived 26 years in a city with streetlights and neighbors and the ordinary texture of ordinary life. And she married a rancher and moved to 85 acres of brush country because she understood what the land meant to me, and she was willing to share that understanding. She did not sign up for what we have now. She doesn't go out after dark. She'd sit on the porch with me sometimes on summer evenings, watching the brush turn black against the sky, drinking iced tea, talking about whatever people talk about when they're 40 and tired and trying to hold a life together. She doesn't do that anymore. She stays inside after sundown, and she doesn't say why, and I don't ask why, and we both know why. She checks the lock on the back door before she goes to bed. She never used to lock the back door. Nobody in ranch country locks their back door. She does now, the deadbolt, every night, and I've seen her check it twice before she goes to sleep. The goats bothered her more than I expected. Not the dead ones, or not only the dead ones, the live ones. After November, she would look at them through the kitchen window in the mornings, and I could see something in her face that wasn't quite grief and wasn't quite fear, more like the look you get when you're aware of a gap between what you can do and what something needs from you. The goats were alive and the goats were at risk, and there was nothing she could do about either of those facts. And Lupe is not a person who tolerates helplessness in herself. She asked me once in February, about 3 weeks after I'd seen the eyes in the mesquite, whether I thought it would keep coming back as long as we had animals. I told her honestly that I didn't know. She nodded and she didn't say anything else, and she went back to the accounts she'd been working on, columns of numbers, Things that balanced when you got them right. What I think she was asking, underneath the question she asked, was whether we should sell. Whether the land was worth what we were paying to stay on it. I think she wanted me to raise that possibility so she didn't have to, and I didn't raise it, and she didn't push. We haven't talked about it since. The animals are alive. The pen is secure as I can make it. The padlock is on the gate. I think she's decided to hold the same position I've decided to hold, which is that this is our land and we're going to stay on it. But I think that decision costs her something every morning when she looks out the kitchen window at the pen, and something every evening when she checks the back door lock. It costs her in a way it doesn't quite cost me, because I have the porch and the rifle and the physical act of watching, which is at least something to do with the fear. She has the waiting. She has the inside of the house and the inside of her own head. I don't know how to fix that. I don't know if it can be fixed. You can't unknow a thing, and Lupe knows now what's on this land, and she knew it as soon as I told her, and she said okay and meant it, and the price of meaning it is what she pays every night before she goes to sleep. I live with it. She lives with it too, and that's the harder thing to carry. The padlock is on the gate. The floodlight is on. The goats are alive tonight. The coffee is on the kitchen counter, and the 30 to 30 is by the back door. When I hear the goats go quiet, if I ever hear them go quiet that way again, I'll go out and I'll look. I'll keep looking. And whatever I find, whatever comes back from Duval County, or wherever it's been between visits, I'll document it the same way I've documented everything else. The necropsy forms and the photos and the records in the gun safe. Because the official story is coyotes, has been coyotes for 50 years at least, will be coyotes the next time and the time after that. But I was on that porch. I saw the gate latch open. I saw the herd part like water. I saw two dark eyes in the scope at 100 yards look at me and make a decision about what I was. And I know what it felt like to be assessed and found insufficient to matter. I'm going to matter anyway. I'm going to keep the records and tell whoever will listen and sit on the porch with the coffee and the rifle and be here on this land, on my grandfather's land when it comes back. Because it comes back. That much I know. It always comes back.